Okay, this is good. Bold spiritual living. It's living under the radical premise, I am divine. I'm one with the source of all that is. I'm one, and therefore I'm empowered. So today I want to speak about that. It is a message I believe is so urgent in our world today. You know, have you noticed that things are breaking down in our world? Have you noticed? I mean, the book, all the writings about 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar cycle, was all about that. There was so much fear about the end times, that things were crumbling. And we've noticed, I mean, I just have to say a few words and you'll know, because you'll probably feel in your gut what I feel when I hear those words or listen to the news. Words like the economy, education. Feel a little stress come up when you think about the kind of issues that we're facing here today. Think ISIS. Think South Carolina this past week. Or Ferguson, Missouri. Think about the social issues that we're facing today, many of which we thought we had triumphed over 50 years ago. And they're still arising in our world, right? We don't talk about these too much in a unity community because we want to stay on the positive side of things. And I sure understand that, because we have a law of mind that says where we focus our attention, that's what grows. So my point is not to dwell upon the challenge of our present times. My point is for us to acknowledge the very sometimes subtle influence of those stressors on all of us. I mean, every one of us is subject to it, whether we're consciously tuning in to those things or not. Are you with me on that? Yeah. It's good to acknowledge, because in unity we have some pathways for us to get to the other side of those and to really change the world by changing ourselves. So I'm certainly aware of that, and that's where we're going, by the way, in this message this morning. You add to the world tensions and the struggles, just a few of which I mentioned, you add to that our own personal challenges and struggles, our issues in our relationships, our worries about the well-being of our loved ones, our own climb, our kind of challenge to do more and be more, what's in our hearts that we want to express. When we look at all of those things together, it's easy to feel sometimes as if things are crumbling, the world is breaking down. And often we might feel we are breaking down. How about it? Anybody ever feel that? I am breaking down, it feels that way? Yes, of course. Acknowledging that, I also recognize that when I feel like I am breaking down, it's the scariest thing, is it not? It feels as if I'm going to break apart. And in fact, I believe that's exactly the point of our breaking down, is that for some reason breaking down is necessary. It seems like there's a certain amount necessary for us, because when we break down, we have a chance of breaking open. And there's something about breaking open that really makes the difference for us. There's a god in the Hindu tradition called Shiva. And Shiva has been classically known as the god of destruction and death. Such a scary god. I mean, who'd want to talk about that, right? It was a mistranslation, so to speak, when it got to us in the English language. Shiva really stands for the breakdown of things so that they can transform. The god of transformation. And any of us who've transformed our lives, haven't we noticed that it takes a little breakdown in order for us to break open and transform our lives? Yes? Yes. So to me, this feels like this is the essential thing. And there's purposefulness, in other words, of the challenges in our life. And that's a really good thing to know, that it's purposeful for us. You know, when we break open, something happens. Any of you familiar with a geode? Have you seen a geode? So a geode, before you look at it, when you look at where the geode comes from, it just looks like a big rock, right? It's just a rock on the outside. But geodes are considered the Tootsie Roll Pop of the geologists. And why? Because when you crack open that external, not much to look at shell, you find a beautiful surprise on the inside, correct? The beautiful crystals, every one unique and stunning and shimmering. There's a story from a few generations back of a community in Tibet, a very poor community that had a giant clay Buddha, a statue that was kept underneath a shelter for generations. Well, one time the rains were so heavy that it created a hole in the roof, and so the waters came down over that clay statue, and a piece of the clay was worn away. And one of the monks was nervous about that leaking roof and came down to check on it at night with his flashlight, and when he shined the light on the clay, there was where the clay had broken off, there was this shimmer glowing inside of it. And he became very interested in that and got his chisel and started chiseling away at that whole section. There was a solid golden Buddha underneath that clay that they had not known for generations. It had been covered over during a time of war to protect it from being looted, you see, but nobody knew. So isn't that sort of what this is like? For me, this is why we break down. So we crack open. And we're so afraid that if we crack open, we're going to be just broken, right? And the traditions that you and I, many of us have been raised with, tell us that we're broken, that humanity is broken. But I beg to differ. I think it's much more like the geode, much more like the golden Buddha. I think what happens is when we break open, we have a chance of discovering our essential goodness. We find inside what we have been longing for. We find a divine identity. All the love that ever was exists right here. Locked inside, covered over with clay, so to speak. All power, all wisdom, all faith, all order, all enthusiasm, all that we could ever hope to be and to express. That's what we find inside if we're willing to look, if we're willing to break open. A little example of this, I think it takes a breakdown to get to this so often for us. My daughter, Alicia, several years ago now, lived in Chicago, and she had an experience that I'll always remember. One night after work, she called me, and I live in San Antonio. She called me on the phone, and she was hysterically crying. I was trying to listen for what was going on because she had a hard time conveying it. It turns out that, Alicia she started talking about what a terrible world we're living in, how awful, and she was raised in unity, but she was finding herself at a point of disillusionment. She had watched a television program, and on that program it was called What Would You Do? Anybody seen that show? On this show, they propose some uncomfortable social situations, let's just say that. And then they ask the viewers, what would you do about that? And people are put sort of in a candid camera kind of position, and they observe human behavior. Alicia was watching this show and became horrified to see that the setup was a gang of young people started pummeling and beating up an apparently homeless man on the street. Alicia became hysterical, and her raging to me through her tears was, what human beings do to each other, it's not right, the world we live in. She was breaking down right in my ears, I could hear it. But on the heels of that, as I kept listening, I found out there was something that was bothering her even more than that. Here's what it was. Mommy, I don't know what I would do. That's what really was torturing her. I don't know if I'd be strong enough to do anything in that situation, like so many of the others that walked on by. So she knows that there's something in her that knows what it's here for, to be greater love in the world, to bring harmony. But she was terrified that she wouldn't have it in her to bring to that situation. So that's what happened that night. I'll tell you a little more in a few minutes. But here's really where I'm going. There's a Hindu prayer. I had a long tradition in the Hindu faith as a yoga practitioner many years ago. Some of these things are dear to my heart. This simple little Hindu prayer says, help me to move from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. I believe that's what a breakdown affords us, because when we break down, we break open, and now we have a chance of shifting from the unreal to the real. I believe this requires some practice on our part. Have you found that to be true? That it doesn't happen so easily necessarily. We're not necessarily taught early on how to do that. But through our spiritual practice, through turning our eyes to see rightly, we begin to glimpse the real in the seeming unreal. We begin to stop being so mesmerized by the surface, by the clay around the statue. We stop being so concerned about the appearance in front of us, and we tune in to what is real. But we must practice this. So I have a couple of images for you to look at on the slides this morning to just help us with our practice a little bit. Now, I heard somebody say the name here. Does everybody know who this is? Stephen Hawking. All right, so just imagine you had not been introduced to Stephen Hawking. What could you imagine that someone who didn't know who he was might think about what's going on with him? That he's disabled. That he's helpless. Powerless, yeah. Less than. Yeah. And all kinds of imaginations can come from that. And who would know by looking at this man in the state of his physical body now that deep within that twisted human form is a brilliant brain that has added to our knowledge about the cosmos, about how life works in the smallest, most invisible aspects of it. That he is revered, and he is one person who has made huge contributions in our world. We wouldn't know that by looking at him, would we? But we tune our eyes to see. Because we know him, it's easier. Now, the next picture I want to show you is someone that's a dear friend of mine. This is Cecilia. Cecilia and I have been friends for many years. Our children grew up together in Unity in Omaha. Now, Cecilia, her legs were withered from polio when she was a girl, so she's been in a wheelchair most of her life. And Cecilia has really shared with me through the years the amazing imaginations that people have had about her, just sort of unquestioningly assuming that she couldn't do a lot of things. But this woman was a fellow YOU sponsor with me, and when we would go to rallies and we would do the beautiful universal dances for peace, Cecilia was in the circle there, and the kids got to calling her the wheelchair lady. So she was the wheelchair lady for them. This picture, by the way, was taken just a few months ago. And this is Cecilia in her Zumba class. Wouldn't know it by looking at her. Wouldn't know her inner capacity, what was possible for her by looking at the outside, correct? Yes. Okay, so next picture I want to show you. This is a picture of an anonymous woman in the hospital, hooked up to all kinds of tubes and monitors. Now what I'd like you to do is to substitute for this picture somebody in your own life that you have known in the hospital, someone you care deeply about. And imagine what it feels like to you when you're thinking you're going to go visit her in the hospital, your loved one in the hospital, when you find out that she's very sick. What typically comes up first for you? Fear. You're worried about her, right? You're not sure what's going on. You want to know all the details. So what typically happens is that we would go to visit our loved one in the hospital, and that's what we're talking about. That's what we're interested about. We're looking at all that's going wrong here, and we're very much afraid. And our actions and our conversation all show it. So what would it be like if instead we would look to the depths of her and we would know her innate wholeness of being? What if we would know and see with our own eyes inside of her and see that divine life is beating in her heart, that she is in fact, every cell of her body is alive in every way, doing all that it can to sustain her life? And what if we saw to the heart of her, that heart that she's there even in that bed to be love in the world, that, very often patients are mistakenly thinking they're there for others to love them, but guess what? In her presence, the nursing staff and the medical doctors and all of her visitors receive love, experience the love that emanates from her being. Are we able to see that and be that champion of that inner her? And do you think we could do a little bit of good for her by seeing her that way rather than, you poor thing? Okay, next picture. Some of you might be familiar with this gentleman who was on Dancing with the Stars, courageous. This was his face after having been burned in Iraq in a terrible ammunition fire. This is after 24 surgeries. And this man has the audacity to be a public figure today and to stand being a teacher for so many others. But just imagine his face even 24 surgeries back. Imagine, I live in San Antonio where the Center for the Intrepid is, so we see those intrepid, maimed bodies all the time, walking proudly around or in their wheelchairs or however they can get around in San Antonio. And are we able to see what prompted them to serve us all? Are we able to see the essential, intact spirit of this man rather than see a broken body? This is where our eyes must tune to. We must begin to see rightly, from the unreal to the real, from the illusion to the truth. Okay, another one for you here. Difficult, uncomfortable, painful. And this is an anonymous woman who weighs 765 pounds that can't leave her house. Imagine what the world says about her. You know the judgment, don't you? She did this to herself. And so many other terrible things. Even if she could move outdoors, she probably wouldn't want to in the face of so much judgment. So are we able to see, again, a heart that's beating with love for humanity, Are we able to see the inner fervor, the longing within her to triumph over her own fears and challenges? Are we able to see the goodness that she must extend to those who are right there in her close circle? Are we able to see her divine identity? And one more. This guy you might also be familiar with, some of you, Nick Vujicic. Nick was born without arms or legs. He has one foot you can see off his left hip, and that allows him to steady himself. He was raised by parents who were very audacious. And they said, never, ever, ever question whether you belong here or whether you have something to contribute. So this guy can do things I've never even attempted. He surfs, he golfs, he writes with the toes on that one foot. I mean, this guy is amazing, and he's now speaking all around the world, telling people, stop feeling sorry for yourself and get up off the floor and do some good. Be who you were created to be. And he knows it. But people looking at him until he opens his mouth, and because he's hard to miss. I'm not saying that because of his body. I'm saying because of his presence, hard to miss. He knows who he is. But before you would see that in him, how easy it would be to mistakenly see something going wrong there. But there is a spirit that's larger than any human capacity could ever be. Okay, thank you for showing those to us. Are you with me in just seeing this is the practice that we must be about, is we must question every judgment we have about what we're looking at and who we're looking at. And guess what? Even in the mirror. Maybe for many of us, especially in the mirror. For me, that became my great quest in this last few years. In fact, when I was writing Divine Audacity, and that was 60 pounds ago for me, I came face to face with Linda, and I called into question all the nonsense that I had seen in myself, all that I had imagined myself to be that was false. And I started looking through different eyes. I had broken open, and I experienced the longing that was in me to see myself truthfully rather than falsely. And I think that's what we all do when we break down. We break open and we have a chance of seeing the truth. So to break through, like Charles Fillmore says, we must begin to claim all that we can imagine God to be, because all that God is, we must rightfully become ourselves. We must take it on. We must begin to live this way. In the Gospel of Philip, which is one of the scriptures that was found in the Nag Hammadi scriptures in the 40s, in that scripture, it's just beautiful. It says that, in this world, we don't see rightly. In this world, what we see, we don't become. Like, you can look at the sun, you can look at the stars, you can look at a river, and you don't become the sun or the stars or the river. But in this other world, he says, in the spiritual sense, in that realm, you look at what you look at, you are. What you look at, that's what you become. And to me, that's really the point. What you look at, in other words, what you're willing to see. As Jesus so frequently was quoted as saying, those that have eyes to see, let them see. Now, my daughter had something profound happen in answer to her exquisite longing and that question that was on her mind so painfully. 24 hours later, the next evening, she called me again. Mom, you'll never believe what happened. That morning, the morning after she had watched that show, She was on her way to work. She had to take public transportation in Chicago, and she had a stopover. The stopover to switch buses was right in front of a middle school. Standing around were a bunch of middle school kids, and some big kids, a little group of them, were behind her. She could hear their conversation, and she became concerned when it became violent. Their words became violent. And all of a sudden, she said, this gang of kids turned toward one of the kids and started beating him. Literally started beating up on another kid. Alicia said, I don't know what happened, Mom. I didn't even think about it. I just ran over there and I tried to break them apart. She said, they're towering over me and I didn't even think about it. She says, I'm like yelling, you stop hitting that kid. She's like putting her arms in there and trying to break them up. And there was the ringleader, big, tall kid, started looking down at her and stared at her like he wanted to hurt her. And she said, I faced off with that kid. I stared at him, and I stared at him until he lowered his eyes and walked away. The bus came, thankfully. She got on it and continued on to her school. When she arrived at her school where she was teaching children with autism, she fell in a puddle in front of her fellow teachers who all told her she was crazy for getting in the middle of that. But Alicia triumphed. She said, Mom, I proved to myself I could do it. I know, just like she was saying to me, I know who I am. I know what's inside of me. And it just changed her whole outlook. You see, this is what we long for, and this is why we break down. That painful awareness she was having of how horrible the world is and how painful it is for people to be hurting one another led her to see something about her own true nature. That's the purpose of it, and that's what we're all here to do. Now, we might say to ourselves, and I certainly have, and I believe Alicia has too, well, how much can I really change the world? I'm just one person. Just think about this. One candle lit in a cave can light the way for a mile ahead. One flashlight in the woods at night can carry a whole group of people. One light inside of you, the light of God, the light of love, the light that you are, that maybe comes through your words, one word of encouragement to another person. You think that makes a difference? It ignites that light in them. That's it, right? To be audacious enough to allow ourselves to feel, to break down, to break open, to break through. I'll leave you with this message from A Course in Miracles. Today, I will accept the truth about myself. I will arise in glory and shine my light in the world today. Again, today I will accept the truth about myself. I will arise in glory and allow the light in me to shine upon the world. Today, I will accept the truth about me. I will arise in glory and allow the light in me to shine upon the world today. Amen? Amen. Amen. Thank you.